The first time I met Tasselli, I was trying to fix a busted coolant pipe in her ship. I'd been running my little repair gig on Ryloth Station for a few years, and clients ranged from cranky miners to eccentric merchants. Tasselli? She was different. Tall, sleek, with that shimmering teal skin and her species' glowing facial markings that flickered subtly when she spoke. I couldn't help but notice her sharp teeth when she smiled. Was she dangerous? Maybe, but a credit's a credit, and she paid well. "The pipe's over there," she said, pointing to a maintenance hatch with a clawed hand. Her voice had a musical quality that lingered in the air, but her tone was all business. "It's leaking thermogel. Try not to burn yourself." I'd seen thermogel leaks before. Annoying, but fixable. I grabbed my toolkit, crawled under the hatch, and got to work. That's when I noticed the problem. This wasn't a standard wear and tear issue. Something or someone had gnawed through the tubing. Tasselli," I called out, poking my head back up. "Do you have pests on board?" Her glowing markings flared a bright gold for a moment. "No. What do you take me for?" She paused, then muttered, "Not pests. More like uninvited guests." I frowned, but went back to work. The whole time, I could feel her eyes on me. It wasn't just curiosity. It was intense. Like she was sizing me up for something. The second time I met Tasselli, she called me in the middle of the night cycle. "It's an emergency," she said, her voice breathless over the comm. When I arrived, she looked different. Her markings pulsed rapidly, her movements jittery. She was wearing something loose and flowing, and the ship's interior smelled sweet, like citrus and something floral. I had to focus to keep my head clear. "The coolant's leaking again?" I asked, toolbox in hand. "No," she said, stepping closer. Too close. "This isn't about the pipes." That's when it hit me. I'd heard stories about the Kalasari mating season, but I'd never met one of them up close during it. Their pheromones could overwhelm most species if you weren't careful, and judging by the way my pulse quickened, I wasn't careful enough. Tasselli," I said, backing up a step, "you're, leaking something else?" She laughed, a low, throaty sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Am I that obvious?" "A little," I admitted, trying to keep my breathing steady. "Look, I'm flattered, but I'm not sure this is—" "I didn't call you here for that," she interrupted, though her glowing markings told a different story. "Not entirely." "Not entirely?" She sighed and gestured to a control panel. "My navigation system is fried. I need your help." I blinked. "And this couldn't wait until morning?" Her markings flared again, this time an irritated red. "No. I'm grounded until it's fixed, and let's just say staying here during my condition isn't ideal." "Right. Because half the station would be banging down her airlock if they got a whiff of her pheromones." "Fine," I said, setting down my tools. "But you're going to owe me big for this." As I worked on the NAV system, Tasselli hovered nearby, watching me intently. I tried to focus on the wiring, but her presence was distracting. Every so often, she'd lean in to ask a question or offer a tool, and I'd catch a waft of that sweet, heady scent. "You're good at this," she said after a while, her tone softer than before. "It's my job," I replied, not looking up. "No," she said, stepping closer. "I mean you're good. You're steady. Reliable." I glanced at her, unsure how to respond. Her markings had softened to a gentle blue, and there was something vulnerable in her gaze. It was a stark contrast to the confident, almost predatory demeanor she'd had earlier. "Thanks," I said awkwardly, turning back to the panel. "Almost done here." She didn't say anything for a moment, and I thought she'd finally backed off. But then she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's hard being alone during this time." I froze, the screwdriver halfway to the panel. Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. I wasn't sure what to say, so I settled for honesty. "I'm guessing it's not easy for you to trust people," I said carefully. She laughed bitterly. "Trust? No. Not when most people see me as a temptation." A challenge. I looked at her, then really looked at her. Beneath the glowing markings and sharp teeth, she seemed tired, lonely, maybe even scared. For what it's worth, I said, I'm not here to take advantage of you. Just fix your ship. Her markings flickered, shifting to a soft green. I know. That's why I called you. By the time I finished the repairs, the sweet scent in the air had faded, and Tassili seemed more composed. She walked me to the airlock, her movements more fluid than before. Thank you, she said, her tone genuine. For everything? Just doing my job, I replied, slinging my toolbox over my shoulder. She hesitated, then added, if you ever need anything, you know where to find me? I nodded, stepping through the airlock. Same goes for you. As the hatch closed behind me, I couldn't help but smile. Tassili was unlike any client I'd ever had, but something told me this wouldn't be the last time I saw her. And honestly, I didn't mind. Chapter 1. The Call. My name is Derek Walters, interstellar plumber extraordinaire. At least, that's what I tell myself to feel better about my job. Turns out, when humanity finally joined the galactic community, our knack for patching up broken things earned us more than just a reputation for engineering. We got jobs. Lots of jobs. Take me, for instance. I'm a certified level 5 technician for fluid systems, meaning I'm licensed to fix everything from leaking cryopipes to clogged nutrient dispensers. If it's liquid and it's broken, I'm your guy. Of course, that doesn't make it glamorous. My latest gig started like any other. I was just finishing up patching a hyperconduit on a Dravian freighter when my comm tablet buzzed. The caller ID displayed a name in alien script that I couldn't read. Not a great start. With a sigh, I tapped the accept button. Derek Walters, Fluid Systems Tech. How can I help you? The voice on the other end was feminine, though it had that weird warbling quality that came with translation software. Greetings, Technician Walters. My name is Jyla, and I require your expertise. Sure thing, Jyla, I said, already bracing for the usual. My Starliner's waste recycler is jammed, or my oxygen coolant system sprung a leak. But what she said next caught me off guard. My domicile's hydration array is malfunctioning. The main pipeline is compromised. A private residence? That was rare. Most of my jobs were on ships or stations. Where are you located? I asked, pulling up the scheduling interface on my tablet. Her response came with coordinates that made my eyebrows climb. She lived on a planet called Valera Prime, in the heart of Harnexian territory. Harnexians were, well, let's just say they weren't known for their hospitality. Tall, strong, and covered in smooth, iridescent scales, they were one of the few species in the galaxy that made humans look like frail twigs by comparison. I'll head over, I said after a moment. Send me the details. The call ended, and I stared at the coordinates. I was about to head into the proverbial lion's den. Still, a job's a job. And the pay? Well, private residences usually meant deep pockets. I packed my tools, boarded my little freighter, the Lucky Wrench, and set a course for Valera Prime. Touching down on Valera Prime was like stepping into a fever dream. The air shimmered with heat, and the sky was a swirling mix of oranges and purples. The flora glowed faintly, casting eerie shadows across the ground. But the strangest part was the architecture. Harnexian buildings looked like massive coral formations, all curved edges and natural flow, as though they'd grown from the planet itself. Jyla's home was no different. It towered above the surrounding jungle, its spires gleaming in the sunlight. As I approached, the front entrance slid open with a whisper. Standing in the doorway was Jyla herself. She was stunning, in that intimidating, otherworldly kind of way. Her scales caught the light, shifting between shades of green and gold. Her eyes, large and slit-pupilled, locked onto me with an intensity that made me feel like prey. And she was tall, really tall. I'm no shrimp at 6 feet, but she easily had a foot on me. You must be Technician Walters, she said, her voice smoother in person than through the translator. That's me, I said, hoisting my tool bag onto my shoulder. You've got a hydration array problem? She nodded and stepped aside. This way. I followed her into the house, trying not to gawk. The interior was as organic-looking as the exterior, with walls that seemed to pulse faintly, like they were alive. The air was thick with humidity, and I could hear the faint sound of water dripping somewhere. The array controls the flow of water throughout my domicile, Giler explained. It has ceased functioning. I attempted basic repairs, but my efforts were unsuccessful. Don't worry, I said. I'll have it sorted in no time. She led me to a room where the array was located. The system was a marvel of alien engineering, all sleek lines and glowing panels. It was also leaking badly. Water pooled on the floor, and the main pipe had a jagged crack running along its length. I knelt beside the array and opened my toolkit. Looks like the main pipe's under too much pressure. Did you increase the flow rate recently? Gila hesitated. Yes. It was necessary. Necessary for what? I asked, glancing up at her. She looked away, her scales darkening slightly. It is complicated. Fair enough. I'd learned not to pry too much into alien business. I got to work cutting away the damaged section of pipe and replacing it with a reinforced segment from my kit. As I worked, I couldn't help but notice Gila watching me closely. Her gaze was intense, almost predatory. When I finished, I stood and wiped my hands on my pants. All done. Try not to overdo it with the flow rate, or this could happen again. Thank you, she said, stepping closer. Your efficiency is impressive. Just doing my job, I said, suddenly very aware of how close she was. Her scent filled the air, a mix of something sweet and spicy that made my head swim. Perhaps you would like to stay for a meal, she asked, her voice softer now. As thanks? My stomach growled in response, and I realized I hadn't eaten since breakfast. Sure. That sounds great. Gila's lips curved into a smile, and for a moment, I felt like I'd just agreed to something far more complicated than dinner. Chapter 2. The Truth About Mating Season. Dinner with Gila was an experience. The meal consisted of vibrant, gelatinous cubes that glowed faintly in the dim light. They tasted surprisingly good, a mix of citrus and something savory I couldn't quite place. Gila watched me intently as I ate, her own portion untouched. So, do you get a lot of human visitors out here? I asked, trying to make conversation. No, she said. You are the first. Really? Why call a human plumber, then? Her eyes met mine, and there was something unreadable in her expression. Humans are known for their adaptability. I believed you would be suitable. There was that word again. Suitable. Before I could press her on it, a low, vibrating hum filled the air. Gila stiffened, her scales rippling with an iridescent sheen. What was that? I asked. She stood abruptly. You should leave. Wait, what? Why? Her gaze locked onto mine, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. It is mating season, Technician Walters. My pheromones are potent. Prolonged exposure could be dangerous. My brain stuttered to a halt. Mating season? Gila nodded, her movements tense. I called for assistance before it began, but your arrival was delayed. Now, the conditions are less than ideal. I stared at her, the pieces clicking into place. The increased flow rate, her strange behavior, the intense way she'd been watching me. You're saying you're emitting pheromones right now? Yes. Her voice was tight. And humans are particularly susceptible. Great. Just great. Of all the gigs in the galaxy, I had to land this one. Okay, I said, standing slowly. I'll just head back to my ship, and we can settle up later. Gila stepped in front of me, her expression conflicted. You do not understand. Once exposed, the effects may linger. Leaving now could intensify them. I ran a hand through my hair, my heart pounding. So what am I supposed to do? Her gaze softened, and she took a step closer. Stay. The pheromones will dissipate in time. I will do my best to control their potency. that didn't exactly fill me with confidence. But as her scent washed over me again, I realized she might be right. My head felt foggy, my thoughts sluggish. Leaving now could make things worse. "Fine," I said, trying to ignore the heat rising in my cheeks. "But you'd better have a damn good plan." Her lips curved into that enigmatic smile again. "Do not worry, Technician Walters. I will take care of you." Something told me I was in way over my head. Chapter 3. The Trouble with Zelixian Plumbing. After 2 hours of wrestling with what could only be described as a fusion between a pipe organ and an octopus, I was no closer to fixing it than I was to understanding the Zelixian definition of simple. The pipes in Laroon's domicile seemed to have a life of their own, constantly shifting, vibrating, and occasionally hissing out bursts of steam that smelled faintly of lavender and burnt rubber. "Do you always overthink everything?" Laroon's voice startled me. She'd been leaning against the doorway, watching with an amused expression. Her silver skin shimmered in the low light, a subtle glow that made her look almost ethereal. Or maybe that was just the effect of her pheromones. I'd been feeling unusually distracted since I'd arrived, but I chalked it up to dehydration or the sheer weirdness of this job. "I'm not overthinking," I replied, trying to sound confident. "I'm problem-solving." "Big difference." She chuckled, the sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "You've been staring at that coupling for 20 minutes. It's loose. Tighten it, and the entire system will recalibrate." I turned to glare at her, but her expression was so genuinely amused that I couldn't stay mad. She had that kind of face, the kind that made you want to smile even when you didn't feel like it. "If you knew the solution, why didn't you fix it yourself?" I asked, tightening the coupling as she'd suggested. The pipes hummed, then settled into a smooth, rhythmic vibration. "Because you're here to learn," she said, stepping closer. "And because I enjoy watching you struggle." "It's endearing." "Endearing," I repeated, shaking my head. "That's one word for it." She moved even closer, and I felt the temperature in the room rise. Or maybe it was just me. Her eyes, a mesmerizing shade of violet, seemed to see right through me. "You're different from the others," she said softly. "Most humans are cautious around my kind. But you're curious, fearless, or just stupid," I muttered, trying to focus on the pipes instead of her proximity. "I'm not exactly known for my self-preservation instincts." Her laughter filled the room, and I felt my cheeks heat up. "Damn pheromones. Perhaps that's why I like you," she said, her tone teasing. "You're unpredictable." "Well, unpredictability is my specialty," I said, straightening up and wiping my hands on my jumpsuit. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got a system to test." But as I turned to inspect my handiwork, the pipes began to rattle violently. Before I could react, a jet of greenish fluid shot out, drenching me from head to toe. Laroon's laughter echoed through the room as I stood there, dripping and glaring at the now stable pipes. "Endearing," she said again, her eyes sparkling with amusement. I groaned. This was going to be a long day. Chapter 4. Pheromones and Protocol. By the time I finished fixing the rest of the plumbing, I was thoroughly exhausted and mildly irritated. Laroon's occasional quips didn't help, though I couldn't deny that her presence made the work interesting. She had a way of making even the most mundane tasks feel like an adventure. "So," I said, wiping my hands on a towel, "is this the part where you tell me there's a second system that needs fixing?" She tilted her head, considering. "Not quite. But there is something else we need to discuss." Her tone had shifted, and I felt a prickle of unease. She gestured for me to sit, and I followed her to a low, cushioned bench that seemed to mold itself to my shape as I sat down. Laroon settled beside me, her expression unusually serious. "You've noticed the effect I have on you," she began, her eyes meeting mine. I hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, it's hard not to notice." "Is it normal?" She smiled faintly. "For my species, yes. During our mating season, our bodies produce pheromones that influence others. It's a biological imperative, designed to ensure compatibility and attraction. And you couldn't have mentioned this sooner? I asked, crossing my arms. Like, maybe before I agreed to help you? Her expression softened. Would it have made a difference? I opened my mouth to reply, then closed it again. She had a point. I'd have come here regardless, if only because I couldn't resist a challenge. So what now? I asked. Am I going to turn into some kind of love-struck idiot? She laughed, a sound that eased some of my tension. No. The effects are temporary and largely psychological. But there is one thing you should know. I raised an eyebrow. Oh, this should be good? The pheromones can amplify emotions, she said, her tone cautious. If there's already an attraction, it might become stronger. I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. Was she implying that You're kidding, right? I said, forcing a laugh. I'm just here to fix your pipes. That's it. Her gaze was steady, unflinching. Are you sure? I wanted to argue to deny it, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I stood abruptly, needing to put some distance between us. I'll get my tools, I mumbled, retreating to the other side of the room. As I gathered my equipment, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was in way over my head. Fixing pipes was one thing. Navigating alien pheromones and potential interspecies attraction? That was a whole different ballgame. And yet, as I glanced back at Laroon, I couldn't help but wonder if maybe, just maybe, it was a game worth playing. Chapter 5. The Leak Beneath the Surface. I arrived at her habitat just as the twin suns dipped beneath the jagged skyline of the Zyathian colony. The air was dense, tinged with the peculiar musk of blooming creshwood flowers and the ever-present hum of alien wildlife. My tool bag swung at my side as I approached the circular dwelling, its walls pulsating with bioluminescence, a testament to Zyathian organic architecture. Kalara stood at the entrance, her tall, willowy frame silhouetted against the glowing aperture. Her skin shimmered with faint hues of green and gold, shifting like liquid metal under the colony's dimming light. She waved me in, her expression inscrutable, but her antennae twitching, a sign of agitation or excitement, I couldn't tell. The main conduit, she began, her voice a melodic hum with an undertone of urgency. It's more than a simple leak. Something deeper. Let me guess, I said, stepping into the cool, pulsating interior of her home. You tried to patch it yourself. Her antennae flicked sharply. I am a Zyverian biologist, not a maintenance engineer. I chuckled, pulling out my scanner. Well, lucky for you, fixing things is my specialty. Let's see what we're dealing with. Her dwelling was a marvel of Zyathian ingenuity. Living walls that responded to touch, a ceiling that glowed softly in response to motion, and a central core that pulsed with the rhythmic heartbeat of an engineered organism. The leak, however, was less poetic. A steady trickle of viscous fluid seeped from an organic conduit running along the wall. Here, Kalara said, pointing to the break in the system. Her fingers brushed mine as she handed me a data slate. Her touch was warmer than I expected, sending an involuntary shiver up my spine. I glanced at her, but her focus remained on the leak. You use living systems for your infrastructure, I noted, crouching to examine the breach. Impressive, but it's bound to have complications. Organic systems adapt, she replied, crouching beside me. They evolve, unlike static mechanisms. Yeah, but when they fail, it's a whole new level of mess. Her lips quirked upward, the Zyathian equivalent of a smile. I suppose that's why I called you. I pulled out a biospanner and began probing the damaged conduit. As I worked, Kalara watched, her gaze intense. It was a little unnerving, but also flattering. You've been here for a few Earth months, she said after a moment. Do you like it, Zythia? Sure. It's different. Different? Her antennae twitched. In a good way, I clarified. Back home, everything's synthetic. Here, everything feels alive. It is alive, she said softly, her eyes briefly meeting mine. For a moment, the hum of the colony, and the distant chirps of alien creatures faded. Her gaze lingered, and I could feel the weight of it. Curiosity, intrigue, something more? The biospanner chirped, pulling me back to the task at hand. Found the problem. The system's overloading. Probably a feedback loop in the central. Before I could finish, a low rumble reverberated through the walls. Kalara's antennae flared, and her eyes widened. What was that? I asked, standing quickly. She turned toward the core room. It's spreading. Chapter 6. The core of the matter. We rushed to the central core, a towering column of pulsating organic matter surrounded by conduits and crystalline nodes. The room throbbed with energy, and the walls glowed with an unsettling red hue. This isn't just a leak, I said, scanning the core. The whole system's destabilizing. Kalara's antennae twitched furiously. If the core collapses, I'm guessing that's bad. Very bad, she confirmed, her voice tight. The core regulates the habitat's ecosystem. Without it, everything will decay. I didn't need a biology degree to understand the stakes. All right, let me think. I ran a diagnostic on the central node while Kalara monitored the core's readings. The problem was clear. The organic system was rejecting its own feedback signals, causing a buildup of unstable energy. Fixing it required more than just a patch. It needed a reset, but a controlled one. We have to reboot the core, I said. Kalara's eyes widened. A reboot? That's dangerous. The entire system could collapse, I know. But if we don't, it's guaranteed to fail. She hesitated, her gaze darting between the core and me. You're certain? Not even a little, I admitted. But it's our best shot. Kalara took a deep breath, her antennae dipping. What do you need? Stabilizers. Organic dampeners. And I glanced at her. Someone to trust me? Her expression softened and she nodded. You have me? We worked quickly, moving in sync despite our vastly different backgrounds. Kalara's knowledge of the system was invaluable, guiding me through the intricacies of Zyathian biotech. The room trembled as the core's instability grew, but we pressed on, synchronizing our efforts like we'd been a team for years. Almost there, I muttered, securing the last stabilizer. Kalara handed me a crystalline node, her fingers brushing mine again. This time, the contact lingered, her touch firm yet gentle. You're remarkable, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I glanced at her, surprised. I didn't expect that. You face challenges far from your home, in a world not your own. And yet you persist. It is admirable. Thanks, I said, feeling heat rise to my cheeks. But let's save the compliments until we're not about to blow up. She laughed, a melodic sound that eased the tension for a moment. Then, with a shared nod, we initiated the reboot. The core surged, its glow intensifying as energy rippled through the conduits. For a heart-stopping moment, everything went still. Then, with a resonant hum, the system stabilized. The red hue faded, replaced by a soothing green light. It worked. Kalara breathed, her antennae relaxing. I let out a shaky laugh. Yeah, it did. We stood there, basking in the glow of the restored system. Kalara turned to me, her eyes luminous. Thank you, human. Just doing my job, I said, though her gratitude stirred something deeper. She stepped closer, her presence warm and inviting. Perhaps there is more to you than just your job. I swallowed hard, the intensity of her gaze making my heart race. Kalara. Before I could finish, she leaned in, her lips brushing mine in a gesture that was both alien and unmistakably intimate. The world seemed to hold its breath as her warmth enveloped me. When she pulled back, her cheeks glowed faintly. Forgive me. It's mating season and I blinked, stunned. Mating season? Her antennae drooped slightly. It heightens our emotions. But I meant what I said. You are remarkable. I cleared my throat, struggling to process. Well, that's good to know. Her laughter was soft, her eyes filled with both amusement and something deeper. "Perhaps we should focus on the next task." "Yeah," I said, adjusting my tool bag. "Let's do that." But as we returned to work, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted between us, and that my life on Sci-Fi was about to get a whole lot more complicated. Chapter 7. The Heat of the Moment. I adjusted my tool belt, the buckle barely keeping my pants in place as I balanced on the precariously narrow lip of the alien piping system. These conduits weren't built for human hands. Heck, they barely seemed to be built for functionality. Strange, organic-looking tubes pulsed gently with a luminescent fluid, like some neon blood flowing through a giant's veins. I muttered a curse under my breath, jamming my multi-tool into a stubborn valve. "Careful," Kaolinen's voice purred from behind me, her tone vibrating with a frequency that set my hair on end. "That's a sensitive junction." I turned slightly to glance at her. Kalyn, the alien girl who'd called me out here, stood with her arms crossed, her bioluminescent skin shimmering faintly in the dim light of the chamber. Her species, the Iltheri, were a paradox of lethal grace and stunning beauty, their form humanoid enough to lull you into a false sense of familiarity until you caught the slits of their secondary eyelids or the way their hair seemed to float as if underwater. She watched me intently, her eyes glowing faintly in the low light, and I couldn't help but notice the way her tendril-like hair coiled with agitation. "Sensitive, huh?" I said, raising an eyebrow and tightening the valve with a sharp twist. "You called me here to fix this mess, not to coddle it. Unless you'd like to give it a go yourself." She smiled, a sharp flash of teeth that glinted like polished opals. "I could. But you're doing so well." I swallowed hard, ignoring the heat that rose to my face. "Professional, Jack. Keep it professional. This is a job like any other. Just because your client happens to be a 7-foot-tall alien goddess in the middle of her species' mating season doesn't mean." A soft thrum echoed through the chamber, pulling me from my thoughts. The pipes beneath my feet began to vibrate, a low hum building steadily. Kalyn? I said, my voice tightening as I took a step back. "Is it supposed to do that?" Kalyn's expression darkened, and she stepped closer, her gaze fixed on the pulsing tubes. "No." "Great," I muttered. Before I could react, the pipe I'd been working on burst, spraying me with a warm, viscous liquid that shimmered like molten gold. I stumbled back, wiping my face with my sleeve. The fluid tingled against my skin, not unpleasantly, but enough to make me uneasy. Kalyn's eyes widened as she reached for me, her fingers brushing my arm. "Jack, don't move." "What is it now?" I asked, trying not to panic as her grip tightened. "That's pheromone fluid," she said, her voice low and steady, though her gaze betrayed a flicker of worry. "Highly concentrated. Pheromone?" The word hung in the air between us, and suddenly the heat on my skin didn't feel so innocent. "Oh, no." Kalyn's tendrils twitched, her pupils dilating, as she took a step back. "Stay calm. Stay calm." I barked. "I've just been doused in alien love juice, and you want me to stay calm?" "It's not just love juice," she said sharply. "It's a chemical that triggers mating instincts. Strong ones." I stared at her, my heart pounding as the implications hit me. "And you?" Her gaze flicked to the floor, her cheeks darkening to a shade I'd learned was the Iltheri equivalent of a blush. "It's complicated." Chapter 8. Tension and Release. The next hour was a blur of frantic repairs and even more frantic attempts to ignore the tension building in the room. I worked as quickly as I could, avoiding Kalyn's gaze while she hovered nearby, her presence an electric charge in the air. Every now and then, I'd catch a whiff of the pheromone fluid clinging to my clothes, and it would send a shiver down my spine. Not entirely unpleasant, but definitely unnerving. "Almost done," I muttered, twisting the last valve into place. The system let out a low hiss as the pressure equalized, and the pulsing glow of the tube steadied. "Good," Kalyn said, her voice tight. She'd moved to the far side of the chamber, keeping as much distance between us as possible. Her hair tendrils were coiled close to her scalp, a clear sign of agitation. I wiped my hands on my pants and turned to face her. Okay, pipes are fixed. Now what? She hesitated, her gaze flicking to the exit. You should leave. Leave. I repeated, frowning. Just like that. It's safer for both of us, she said, her tone firm. But there was an edge to her voice, a crack in her armor that made me hesitate. Safer? I took a step closer, and her eyes snapped to mine. KLYNN, what aren't you telling me? She sighed, running a hand through her hair. The pheromones, they're affecting me too. I blinked, her words sinking in like a lead weight. Oh. Yes, oh, she said, her tone dry but her expression anything but. My species doesn't handle prolonged exposure well. It's difficult to control. I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. So, what do we do? She met my gaze, her pupils dilated and glowing faintly. You leave. But I didn't move. Instead, I found myself stepping closer, drawn by some invisible force. Her breath hitched, and I could see the conflict in her eyes, the war between instinct and reason. Jack, she said, her voice a warning. KLYNN, I replied, my voice softer. Maybe we... Before I could finish, the room shook violently, cutting me off. A deafening roar echoed through the chamber, and the floor beneath us buckled. I stumbled, grabbing onto a nearby pipe for support as the entire system seemed to come alive, the glowing tubes pulsing erratically. What the hell is happening? I shouted over the noise. KLYNN's expression hardened as she straightened, her hair tendrils flaring. The system's destabilizing. We need to get out of here. Now. Great timing, I muttered, following her as she sprinted toward the exit. The ground shook beneath our feet, and I could feel the heat of the failing system radiating through the walls. We barely made it out before the entire chamber erupted in a shower of sparks and steam. I collapsed against the wall, breathing heavily as I watched the glow of the pipes fade to darkness. Well, I said, glancing at KLYNN. That was fun? She gave me a look that was equal parts exasperation and amusement. You have a strange definition of fun. I chuckled, the sound shaky but genuine. Hey, at least we're alive. For a moment, she just stared at me, her expression unreadable. Then, to my surprise, she smiled, a real, genuine smile that lit up her face in a way that made my heart skip a beat. You're not so bad, Jack, she said softly. Thanks, I replied, grinning despite myself. You're not so bad either. And for the first time since this whole mess started, I felt like maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be okay. Chapter 9, Sparks in the Machinery. Zarathia's crystalline gaze glimmered under the faint ambient lights of her habitat. Her species, the Solarans, were known for their bioluminescent patterns, and hers were mesmerizing, swirling blues and purples that shifted subtly with her mood. Right now, those colors indicated stress. The main intake valve is still jammed, I said, wiping the sweat from my brow. The confined space under her living quarters was tight, and the humid atmosphere made every moment a slog. I'll need to recalibrate the pressure systems manually. Where's that multi-tool you promised? Here, she said, passing me a device that looked more like a glowing, pronged wand than anything from my toolbox back on Earth. Be careful. If you destabilize the pressure too much, the entire system will, she hesitated, the glow of her markings flickering to a pale green. Explode? I asked dryly. She nodded. Great, I muttered, crawling deeper into the tangled mess of pipes. It wasn't the first time I'd dealt with alien plumbing, but Solaran technology was notoriously temperamental. Their systems relied on a balance of fluid dynamics and electromagnetic fields, a combination that seemed designed to confound any outsider. Why did you even call me for this? I grumbled. Surely there are Solaran engineers who could. I wanted someone who wouldn't question certain aspects of the situation, she admitted, her glow shifting to an embarrassed pink. Certain aspects? I echoed, pulling out a corroded coupling. Like what? Mating season. Her voice was barely a whisper. I froze. Come again? It's complicated, she said quickly, her markings flashing in a strobe-like pattern that made my head spin. Just focus on fixing the pipes. Complicated was right. I'd read enough about Solarans to know their mating rituals were as intricate as their technology. They involved pheromones, bioluminescent displays, and if rumors were true, intense emotional bonds. None of that sounded like something I wanted to get tangled up in. Fine, I said, shoving the coupling into place. But if this thing blows up, I'm holding you personally responsible. Understood, she said, her voice tinged with relief. As I worked, I couldn't help but notice the way her glow shifted whenever I looked her way. It was distracting, like watching a living aurora borealis. I shook my head, focusing on the task at hand. The last thing I needed was to get caught up in whatever biological circus she was dealing with. When the final adjustment was made, the system roared to life, a low hum resonating through the pipes. Done, I said, crawling out from under the machinery. You're good to go. Zarathia smiled, her glow settling into a soft lavender. Thank you, Adam. Truly. No problem, I said, dusting off my hands. Just maybe call us Solaran next time, yeah? She tilted her head, her markings flickering with what I guessed was amusement. Perhaps. Chapter 10. The Bonding Catalyst. 2 days later, I was back at Zarathia's habitat. Not by choice. The system's acting up again, she'd said over the comm. Please, Adam. I need your help. I tried to decline, but something in her voice had stopped me. Now, standing in her living quarters, I regretted every decision that had led me here. It's worse than before, I said, examining the pressure gauges. The readings were erratic, fluctuating wildly. What did you do? Nothing, she insisted, her glow shifting to an anxious yellow. I swear. I sighed. All right, let me see if I can stabilize it. As I worked, I became acutely aware of Zarathia's presence. She was standing closer than necessary, her glow pulsing in time with her breathing. The faint, sweet scent of her pheromones filled the air, making it hard to concentrate. Could you maybe step back a bit? I asked, glancing over my shoulder. She blinked, her markings flickering. Oh, of course. But she didn't move far and I couldn't bring myself to insist. Instead, I focused on the task at hand, my hands moving automatically as I adjusted valves and recalibrated sensors. Adam, she said softly, breaking the silence. Do you know why I called you specifically? I hesitated. Because I'm a sucker for punishment? She laughed, a melodic sound that sent a shiver down my spine. No. Because you're different. From the others. Different how? I asked, not looking up from the control panel. You're kind. Patient. And you don't treat me like an outsider. Her words caught me off guard. I turned to face her, my hands stilling. Zarathia, Before I could finish, the system let out a deafening clang, and a plume of steam erupted from a nearby pipe. Damn it! I shouted, scrambling to shut it down. I thought I had this stabilized. Wait, Zarathia said, stepping closer. Her glow intensified, casting the room in a brilliant light. I can help. How? I asked, gripping the control panel. Trust me, she said, placing a hand over mine. The moment our skin touched, a surge of energy passed between us. Her glow enveloped me, and I felt a strange warmth spreading through my body. The erratic hum of the machinery began to steady, the pressure gauges leveling out. When it was over, the room was silent except for the gentle hum of the system. I stared at her, wide-eyed. What did you do? I asked. It's part of the bonding process, she said, her glow a soft pink. Our energies are compatible. Together, we can stabilize systems that would otherwise be impossible to control. You could have mentioned that earlier, I said, my voice tinged with disbelief. Would you have believed me? She asked, her expression gentle. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. She had a point. So, what does this mean? I asked finally. It means we're bonded now, she said, her glow brightening. Whether you like it or not. I stared at her, my mind racing. Bonded? I'd come here to fix some pipes, not to become part of an alien mating ritual. But as I looked into her crystalline eyes, I couldn't deny the connection I felt. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't such a bad thing after all.